You know, it's always been interesting to me how everybody in this society is told they have to play by a set of rules. A set of rules that you're never really told what they are. They're just exampled by the complicity of everybody else who didn't ask and don't really know what the rules are or where they came from. Now, isn't that interesting? It's a very strange world, isn't it? Where people don't question anything. And they surely don't question the right things. Because if they question the right things, they might find out that things aren't exactly what they purport to be. They might find out that the world isn't exactly what it seems to be. They might find out that a lot of what they assumed somewhere it was supposed to be written down and some great authority told them it was the way it was supposed to be. Well, the thing is that that's sort of true, actually. The truth in that is that there is a great authority, and it's the authority over all the kingdoms, all the world, all of creation. But that's not who created all these rules. All these rules were created by other people. Now, no one can tell you exactly who and where all those rules were created or why they were created. They can tell you some of it, but for the most part, most people don't know. And they never bothered to ask. Because people, well, they just assume it's the way it's always been. They assume it's the way it's supposed to be. Or they throw the baby out with the bathwater and rebel against all of it, but never really ask the questions about any of it. Isn't that interesting? You see, in a very strange way, you live in a two-headed, authoritarian government or domination system that both offer you false choices. They give you the appearance of options, the appearance of choice. But really what it is it's just a mirage. Because most of them can't tell you where any of the rules and conventions that everybody accepts came from either. Because they never looked. Of course, you've got a couple of flavors of it. You've got the religious version of it. And you have the secular version of it, which is just a different form of religion that denies that it's a religion. The irony is that still most people never bother to look or ask about what's real themselves. They're used to being fed somebody else's perspective that tells them that it's true, that it's real. Now, I'm not talking about Gnosticism here or some, cultic magic. What I'm talking about is just observations on the world that you live in. Because most people really don't ask the questions. At some point they will, usually before they're in their lives if they get that opportunity. But you don't live in a time or in a culture or in a world that really cares about truth. Well, people say they do. They say they care about what's real, what's true. When you really sit down and talk to them and start showing them things that are real and things that are true, the irony is so many of them are repulsed by it that they actually prefer to remain in the counterfeits, the shadows of the real, instead of the real things. See, growing up here in this world, what I learned over the course of my life was that most people, they simply don't care to look beyond the surface appearances of things. I'm talking from an existential perspective, a spiritual level. Now, I have never had a problem with doing that. If anything, I'm probably an extreme opposite of that. But being that way, I saw what that creates in a society in terms of dealing with others that do not value that and see that as a threat to their counterfeits. It is a strange world, right? It is a very strange world. The thing is that though this world seems very alien to me in many ways, it also seems familiar to me. And I look at people, and though most would probably not give me credit beyond what they know of me in the virtual reality of social media, or not getting to know me as a person, there you find that there's a real interesting perspective that develops with those that do. And that changes kind of how things work, right? So if we're dealing with folks from, let's say, within the government, right? If we're dealing with governmental issues, or we're dealing with issues of a personal nature, right? People live in the silos of their own reality bubbles. But if you can get them to be real and to think outside of them for a moment, you see the real people, and they're pretty amazing. But there's something about the world that we live in that forces people to live in this falsity. And that reality of that has a dramatic impact upon how they deal with others. There's a demand in the system that demands conformity to its artificiality. And that artificiality creates a cognitive dissonance, a distortion within their thinking and how they live their lives. Within a Christian framework, we would call that a great darkness. We would say the spirit of the age, the zeitgeist, has blinded their minds, but I don't think it's so much in some cases, and in many cases, that it's not just that it's not that they've been blinded in their mind, it's they're fearful of actually being authentic and real because the system has incentivized them and in many cases forced them and dominated over them to make them be complicit with its artificiality. So we're offered all things artificial here in many ways. Artificial social conventions, artificial expectations, artificial demands, but all in the perspective of artificial choices from the dominance of the polarities, which is why I call this the binary simulacrum. And if you don't fit squarely into one polarity or the other, you're seen with eyes of suspicion. You're dangerous. You're considered a threat, a danger to the system. But what if it's the system that's a danger to everyone else? Now, if you say that to one side, they will tell you that that's the thinking of the other side. But the other side will tell you it's the thinking of the opposite side. That's what I mean by the binary simulacrum. They both have their versions of that. They both have their areas of focus. They're not the same, and they're not perfect mirrors of one another. But they are mirrors in the effects, and that both sides have their own social conventions and expectations that they demand conformity to, either passive aggressively or actively enforced upon you in an obvious manner. You see, I don't fit into either of these. Most people really don't, but they play along because of fear, confusion, and the threat of penalty, being penalized. So they settle into a quiet conformity and a quiet desperation, which eats away at their minds, bodies, and souls. In Christendom, true Christendom, I would say that would be called the world. So the world as it is And then what is backing all of that is your adversary. And this is what I learned, is that your adversary is already defeated. It tries to use the polarities to keep everybody enslaved to it, to keep it alive, and then enslaved to it, and deceived by it, and fear of it. Because it is a simulacrum in and of itself. And it plays both sides of the polarities, and it uses both sides of the polarities as its mechanism to keep people in line with its goals and objectives. But if you really want to know what it is, it's a lie. It's a counterfeit of the real. It's a deception machine, and it is your own shadow. So, we begin with the individual. It's their own shadow. The world system of shadows that demands compliance to it, and your adversary that rules over it from the dust of the ground. So what's interesting is that a lot of religious people can't stand me, and a lot of secularists can't stand me. And I've grown up in this my entire life. But what they actually are really telling me is they can't stand themselves when they do that. And they expose everything about themselves in trying to project, displace, transfer, accuse, and slander me. So I expose it. I expose it simply by existing. I expose it simply by being who I am. And I expose it actively by telling people what has a hold of them and controlling them, including some of you that are listening to this. You see, most people will never take the time to listen to this because, well, they prefer their diversions. They prefer their shadows. They prefer the darkness of a world that is dying. It's dying. It's given over to entropy and the second law of thermodynamics and the corruption there within that amplifies and quickens it. And the more that they do that, the faster all of it deteriorates, increasing their fear, increasing their confusion, and making them even more hostile to anything that upsets their denial of their predicament. And that saddens me greatly, because people were made for so much more than the shadows of what they often become, having chosen to chase their shadow and the shallows thereof, and live only for the surface appearances and the expectations of others' surface appearances upon them. This is an irony, isn't it?